Since April last year, the PS5 has only had 2 partial spec reveals in Wired articles, whereas the competition has showed off its hardware, its chassis and controller on the high-profile Game Awards stage and given hands-on coverage to influencers. So when Sony announced it would be holding a deep dive look at the PS5, there was a ton of expectation from the gamer community, expectations that were not met and led to disappointment. I take a summarised look at what happened, what was revealed and why it made people react in the way it did. Hi, how you doing? Welcome. I've been looking forward to the next gen reveals, and it's been almost 3 weeks since the deep dive. Now with the lockdown here in the UK, as many parts of the world, I thought that it was a good opportunity to take a look at what's been happening a cappella style. Firstly, if you haven't already done so, make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on the next content coming, and there's going to be a lot of good future content coming. And if you find you are enjoying this and it is useful to you, then hit that like button. So yes, this presentation, this deep dive, it disappointed so many and there was such a big backlash about it. There was articles online and there was video commentaries all about it. So why did it disappoint everybody? And there are 2 key reasons. It disappointed because of the actual specification of the PS5, the specification that was revealed, and also it was specifically to do with the presentation. It was a very odd presentation and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that, so make sure you stay tuned in until near the end because that's when we get into it. First things first, the internal SSD. Now it has already been revealed that the upcoming PS5 will not be using a hard drive anymore, it will be using a fast SSD. And of course this provides super quick access, it makes things a lot faster and that's a great benefit. But what we learned from the presentation was that what Sony are doing is they have created a custom interface which will mean access to the drive will be a lot faster. So you have got Microsoft, they've got a SSD working in their Xbox Series X, and that's going to be very fast, and that will have an average read speed of 2.4 gigabytes per second, whereas the PS5s will be 5.5 gigabytes per second, and at a compressed rate that's 8 to 9 gigabytes. Mark Cerny was very proud to talk about how fast this is going to be and what a massive impact it's going to have on games. You will not need to wait for a game to load its visuals. The example he gave is if your character is turning around, you don't need to wait for the game to load. Cerny is saying this will all be a thing of the past, which is a very good thing, and there will be massive improvements. The point being made is that it's fast, super fast, but it's also roughly double the speed of the SSD in the Xbox Series X. So that sounds great. So for people who are not familiar with developing, because I certainly am not, will having double the speed of the SSD on the Series X make a real difference? That remains to be seen. So you've got this great speed, however there is a big negative, and the big negative is the actual amount of storage on the SSD. The Series X has 1 terabyte, but what was so surprising about the PS5s is the size of its SSD. It is only going to be 825 gigabytes of storage. That's actually less than the PS4. The PS4 Pro now has 1 terabyte. So if you compare the amount, that's almost 20% less storage. That's a big hefty chunk. And if you take into account the fact that PS5 games, they're going to naturally be bigger because of the larger graphical assets, the larger file sizes, that means that it's even smaller in real terms. What Cerny did say is that the PS5 is going to be using a compression system called Kraken. And Kraken makes files 10% smaller. So in some ways it mitigates some of that loss of space, but really it's still going to be approximately 10% less in real terms than what PS4 users have. And what Cerny did say about it is there is a responsibility to be cost effective, i.e. Sony is trying to keep the cost of the console down both for the consumers and shareholders. So that tells us something about the actual console. They're aiming to get this to be the cheapest console on the market because it believes that it will be a strength in the console war. However, one of the strengths of the PS4 was not only that it was much cheaper than the Xbox One, but it was also the most powerful. This is a key sticking point. Has Sony pursued cheapness at the expense of performance? That remains to be seen. So what about when the player wants to increase their SSD storage? The Series X solution is that Microsoft is making their own custom SSD cards, which will be very easy to buy, very easy to slot in, perfect compatibility. But of course, with proprietary cards, there is always going to be that cost factor, that extra cost, because there isn't competition on the market. The approach Sony is taking is that they want to have it open so that customers, PS5 owners, can use any SSD that they want with the PS5. There are a couple of caveats, and that is that because the PS5 is using such a fast SSD inside the console, it requires super fast SSD for expanded storage. And what Sony needs to do, or what they would like to do, is test every SSD to ensure that it's compatible for, first of all, being of the fastest type and also of the right size to fit in the PS5 slot. Now the big issue in the console war is which is the most powerful console. Some people can criticize gamer fans for concentrating on something that's not important, but there is a real demand for performance. This is why we have console generations, because people, they want the best performance that is possible. And often, this console wars rivalry can be good-natured. Of course, you always get those fans who go a bit extra and take it to an immature level, but aside from that, people want the best for their own platform. This is why there was such a focus on this deep dive, because here was going to be the answer. Here was going to be the actual answer as to what is more powerful, the Series X or the PS5. And everybody got their answer. The Series X was going to be more powerful because it's got a 12 teraflop GPU, whereas the PS5 has only got a 10.28 GPU. So online, there was a lot of discussion from very technical experts talking about the advantage of each of the systems. So for example, the GPU on the Xbox is 52 compute units, whereas on the PS5 only 36, but they run faster. What does this mean in practical terms? I can't tell you, I can't actually say, but that speed advantage overall is likely to be noticeable. It's definitely going to result in improved performance on the Series X. If the Series X is the most powerful, then it means it's more likely to be the lead platform chosen by developers, meaning games will be made for that console's strengths. Now, for most people, they will not be choosing a console based purely on that performance. There are many people who choose a console for the budget they've got or the collection of the games, but when you are in that console war and you are seeing those comparisons, those game comparisons of which platform has the best performance, then that is going to sting, and this ultimately was the biggest stinger for PlayStation 5 fans who are upset that the console that they have been mostly invested in, that they're looking forward to buying, is not going to be the strongest. Now there is a lot of good stuff in this console. For example, there is going to be custom hardware that doesn't require any special learning from developers. With the PS3, it had the custom silicon, but it was very hard, impenetrable to developers to learn how to code for it. This is going to be beneficial and very easy to use and not noticeable. There's also going to be a new 3D audio system, and it's going to be compatible with headphones or TVs and take advantage of those sound setups. And it uses something called the Tempest engine. Unlike normal surround sound, it just layers sound on top of your hearing experience. What this will try to do, what Tempest will try to do, is project sound in different areas around you so that it actually feels like you are somewhere else. And how Cerny described it is that when he was listening with it, he actually felt that the sound he was hearing was happening around him in the real world. So this could be a great feature. It's very difficult to market, and I don't think it came across so well, but it could be magnificent if it works the way he describes it. After the specification, the other key feature people were waiting to hear about was backwards compatibility. For the past few months, there has been an almost constant barrage of rumours that the PS5 would be completely compatible with all previous generations of PlayStation consoles. Of course, the PS1, the PS2, and the PS3. So again, there was this great deal of expectation from Cerny about this to deliver a home run. All he revealed was that there was going to be compatibility with PS4 games. There was no mention of PS1 or PS2 or PS3. And this And this really stung so many people because everybody, they just wanted to be able to know that their new console, the new PS5, could at least play their library of PlayStation games. But Cerny made no mention of this. All he did say was it would be compatible with PS4 games and PS4 Pro games. Additionally, there was some ambiguity. He said that it had been tested, the backwards compatibility mode, with the top 100 most played PS4 games. Afterwards, there was this reaction that it was only compatible, PS5 is only going to be compatible with these top 100 games. And the reaction was so strong that Sony had to then release a statement to say that they expect it to actually be compatible with the vast library of PS4 games. On top of that, Cerny mentioned that there seemed to be a speed or timing issue in terms of how PS4 games are made to work on PS5. Namely that they could sometimes, the performance of the PS5 was too fast. And this, I recall, is an issue that came up when he was trying to make the PS4 Pro compatible with the PS4. I think the way he got it to work was by making the PS4 Pro exactly double the speed of the PS4. But it would seem that the technical solution that Sony have pursued to deliver backwards compatibility is not working so well. I mean, it might just be that this is part of the normal teething problems, finding a solution, and Sony have just been more open about what they have been doing. However, it did not instill any good confidence that the way Sony are doing things is as good as the way Microsoft are doing things. There was not too much emphasis on the frame rate improvements or the resolution improvements. So Microsoft, we know they've got experience with backwards compatibility, with the resolution, with frame rate improvements, and for Series X, what they are also going to try and do is implement an HDR type of boost to backwards compatible games. So after all this expectation, understandably, gamers were going to be upset because there was not this announcement of full compatibility with previous PlayStation consoles. It was just going to be with PS4, and what was revealed did not seem that comprehensive. And I completely understand it. I mean, I have backwards compatibility with my Xbox One X, and it's great that it's there. I don't use it that often, but I love that I've got that option. I had been playing Okami on my PS3, and I had wanted to continue playing it, but I didn't feel to turn on my old console. So what did I do? I ended up rebuying it, which is ridiculous. So the merits of backwards compatibility are undeniable, but coming off the back from previous comments by PlayStation boss Jim Ryan, where he dismissed the value of backwards compatibility and this lack of clarity with the messaging about what the PS5 backwards compatibility will offer exactly, it's understandable that the fans, that gamers, felt this was not enough, that this was a letdown. And whilst I don't like to give hope based on purely speculation, what I found quite interesting, where it listed the compatible consoles, namely the PS4 Pro and the PS4, there seemed to be space for additional consoles. Am I reading too much into that? Who knows? I don't think it's unreasonable to think that come the time of the full PS5 reveal, there will be possibly some news on this. Okay, so let's discuss the whole style of this presentation, which was very odd and boring and weird all at the same time. After the PS5 deep dive presentation, there was a lot of criticism of the way the presentation was delivered, and a lot of the reaction was that people who tuned in to watch were bored or just felt overwhelmed by it because it was so dry and technical and boring. So what you had is a lot of the gaming websites, the big gaming websites, criticize the fans and try and belittle them in some ways for saying, oh, this was a GDC talk. What did you expect? It was not aimed at you. It was not targeting you. That's why it was so dry. So let's get into this. Firstly, this talk was going to be delivered at the GDC, the Game Developers Conference in March, which I believe would have been held in San Francisco. Now, this conference is not for the general public. It's normally very technical, and there are these panels where all these different developers come across and they talk about their products, their games, what they're working on. It's not intended for the public because they go so deeply into the technical aspects, so much into the nitty-gritty of it all. So you had these websites with their, let's just say, entitled bloggers criticizing the fans for saying that they shouldn't have been watching it anyway, that's why it wasn't interesting. The actual truth of the matter is that Sony invited the fans to watch. What Sony did was they announced it on two of their core mainstream platforms. They announced it on Twitter, and they also announced it on the PlayStation blog. So coming after just 2 wide articles about the PS5, there was this expectation from the fans that they had been invited to watch and learn about what was going to be happening with their console. And certainly PS5 fans would have seen the reveal of the Xbox Series X before Christmas on the Game Awards stage, the big reveal with the big boss of Xbox, Phil Spencer, coming out on stage, revealing the chassis of the console, of the Series X, revealing the new controller and talking about it. And then just in the week of the deep dive, Digital Foundry, they also revealed some more information about the Series X. So it was with all this going on in the background, and then Sony inviting fans to watch the deep dive, that's what created that expectation that this was going to be the big reveal of the PS5, when in fact it wasn't. And there is nothing wrong with making fans aware of the deep dive talk. What could have been communicated better is listing exactly what the talk would be about, i.e. saying there is not going to be a full reveal, there is not going to be a reveal of the controller, we're not going to be talking prices, games, anything like that. This is just purely a discussion of some of the engineering that is in the console. And that would have been a better way to manage the expectations. In terms of the actual format of the deep dive, it was very weird, wasn't it? So what would have been the original intention is that Mark Cerny would have got up on a stage to a packed room of developers who would have loved listening to what he had to say, and he would have been addressing this big room of people. As that was not possible, what Sony decided to do was try and imitate that style of venue. They had Mark Cerny on a stage with a podium speaking to an audience of 3 fake members of an audience. There were these 3 or 4 silhouettes, and they may have been taken from real people, but it seemed like they were computer generated after that, so they were looping, because no way after a 50-minute presentation would they have been staying in almost exactly the same position for all that long. After 5 minutes of sitting, I was shuffling in my chair, and I bet most other people were doing the same. So rather than trying to imitate the live conference, I think it would have worked a lot better with Cerny just sitting at his desk, talking to camera, and then there would be no fakeness about it. It would have just been direct. Instead, he was looking left and right as if addressing members of an audience who clearly were just not there. And at times, Cerny, he was smiling, but there was no one there, and he came across somewhat like Data from Star Trek The Next Generation. And yes, the presentation was criticised for being boring and dry, and I think those are valid criticisms, but I certainly don't blame Mark Cerny. He is actually really interesting to listen to, really excited about tech. It's just you have to handle him the right way. So, if you look back to the 2013 reveal of the PS4, the reveal event in New York, and the PlayStation boss at the time, Andrew House, came out on stage, and he was hosting the event, and he was the leader of the company, he was the face of the company, and he introduced everyone.
You'll meet the minds who form the creative soul of the gaming community.
I've proudly spent nearly all of my life.
3.5 years now.
So what follows now?
And then Mark Cerny was brought on for a time, and in the midst of all this presentation, you had this technical genius come on, and to hear him talk excitedly for a moment in time, it was brilliant. And he became a sort of a meme hero for a while. So I don't know if you read N4G, the video game news aggregate website. At the time, there were so many stories about him, you know, about what he'd said, about what he was talking about how this aspect of the PS4. And at that time, he was loved. He became a little bit of a folk hero. And it's not to say that his technical genius is wasted on the masses, it's just that that's not appropriate for the mainstream public. And the fault lies with PlayStation boss Jim Ryan, because Cerny is a tech guru and he can be dynamite, but like with a football manager selecting his team and their positions, you put everybody in the position that works best for them, that they will work best in. And with Cerny, you don't put him in front to score a goal. You put him in his place, which is the technical aspect. And what Ryan did is he put Mark Cerny at the front of the stage to introduce the PS5, the first video reveal of the PS5, and that was Ryan's mistake. There's something else quite curious about the whole deep dive. It was a 50-minute video published on YouTube at 4 PM GMT UK time. So people were tuning in to watch it and then find out a little bit more about the specification, which didn't come until approximately the middle of the video. At the same time as the video being published, 4 PM going live, Digital Foundry published an article which they had created in conjunction with Sony with PlayStation, and it revealed the details of the specifications of the PlayStation. Sony had asked everybody to watch this video, and then at the same time they've got this article coming out at the same time, which kind of negated the need to watch the whole thing. So after all this, there are plenty of amateur bloggers and pretty major websites sharing unsubstantiated rumours about how the PS5 is doomed, or how there is concern by developers behind the scenes that there are problems at Sony with PlayStation. All of this at this stage is unsubstantiated. Anybody focusing strictly on the GPU-CPU conversation is being short-sighted. The reality is the PS5 has a lot going for it. It's a very powerful machine, but a lot of custom hardware, and behind the scenes Sony has a massive hardware pipeline and software pipeline where they're making this new product, this new platform, and they're going to be producing all these AAA games for it. This low-key reveal of specification was not successful. A bad reveal doesn't mean a bad product. It just means there is a problem with the messaging. Clearly, Sony is going to choose when it wants to fully reveal the console. But when that consumer reveal comes, Sony must ensure it answers all the questions gamers have. Thank you for watching and stay safe. Cheers.